to the June edition, 2021 edition of City Connection. City Connection is the live television program with Grand Rapids Mayor Rosalynn Bliss here at Community Media Center's GRTV Livewire Channel 24. City Connection is where you get to talk to your mayor, hear a little bit about what's going on at City Hall and beyond. And with Community Media Center, I'm your host, Linda Gellasch. Again, Rosalynn Bliss, Mayor of Grand Rapids, is joining us here in the GRTV studio. And today we also welcome to the program Kristin Turkelson, and she is Planning Director for the City of Grand Rapids. So we'll speak with her a little bit later in the show, learn a little bit about the city's master plan and initiatives from the City of Grand Rapids and what's at the forefront here. Later in City Connection is your opportunity to talk with your city leaders. We'll have a question and answer period there. You can connect with us, and you can do that a few different ways. We have email, and that is available at that's available at cityconnection@grcmc.org. We also have GRTV's Facebook page or at rapidian.org where we're live streaming. So with all of that business out of the way, I want to say welcome to you, Mayor Bliss.
Thanks. Good to be with you. Happy June.
Absolutely. We do have summer on us, and it's a busy, busy time.
It is. I feel like as soon as the governor announced the lifting of restrictions, things started to get far busier.
A lot of eagerness to get out there and be out in the world again.
Yeah, it's nice.
Well, there's a few ways to do that right now. With summer here, we have new refreshment zones here in the city, and I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about where the latest ones are opening up, and then how that works.
Yeah, so we've added some here on the west side, so over on Fulton, and then obviously the ones on Bridge Street are in place. And we tried to also connect some of the districts. So before there was a block where you couldn't go from one district to the next. So we also tried to just create more connectivity. So if you were going North Monroe, there was like a block and a half between the two districts. So those are now connected. And this is an opportunity for businesses. They can sell alcohol in a cup as long as it's labeled that it's from their establishment, and people can go outside and not only like in the space adjacent to the restaurant or the bar, where typically they have outside seating, but they'll be able to walk from one establishment to the other, or even gather in different spaces, in public spaces within the district.
Okay, so keeping people outside, and I've seen the markings on sidewalks. Is that how you know where you're in the right place?
Yeah, so there's markings, and then there's also on some of the light posts, you can see a sign that will let you know, like entering or exiting a refreshment zone. And typically, though, if you're outside the zone, what we've been doing is just a lot of education and just reminding people, no, you can't have it in this area. You have to go back to the zone. And for the most part, people have been really compliant, and we have our ambassadors who are out helping educate people and make sure that they know what's okay and what's not okay. But overall, it's so far been relatively successful.
How many areas in total now that you've connected a couple?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I know how many because we connected several of them. But it's a pretty significant area. So all the way down Ionia, most of downtown, and then it goes out North Monroe and now onto the west side. So it's a pretty large area.
Okay. And do you think this is something that might stay around after we have these concerns about a pandemic kind of receding? Will it be with us?
Yeah, well, I hope so. I mean, as of right now, the state law that enables it to happen does have a sunset on it, but there's a lot of cities who are pushing to have that sunset removed so that if the community, if the neighborhood business district wants to maintain a social district and social zones, they're able to do so. So I'm hopeful that legislation will be supported.
Okay.
Yeah.
So definitely another way to get outside.
Yeah.
Coming up later this week is the opening of some of the city's pools as well as splash pads.
Yeah, I'm so glad. You'll remember last summer we ended up not opening our swimming pools, and it was a hot summer and a lot of young people didn't have opportunities to get outside and to cool off and to recreate. So I'm really happy that we're opening up our three large swimming pools, our three pools that we have left. So Richmond and MLK and Briggs. So all three of those will be open. And then we're opening up all of our splash pads, and they'll be open all summer long.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in the past, that took some private funding to do. Is that still the case?
No, fortunately, because of the parks millage, part of the Parks millage was a commitment to use a portion of the millage to open our swimming pools every summer. So as of now, unlike years past, a portion of our Parks millage goes to opening the swimming pools.
Okay,
which is great.
so, another thing to look forward outside, there's new ways to get around. So we talk a lot about the micro mobility options, and there's some new ones that just started up.
Yeah, so this is, not everyone loves the scooters, but for the most part, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about our e-scooters. So for the last 6-7 months, we've been having Spin, and they've provided about 400 scooters in about a 12-mile radius in the city. So you can go from downtown out to the neighborhoods. So last week, we added on another provider, Lime, and they are providing both scooters and electric assist bikes. So you can see the bikes out there. They have a little basket on the front, so you can jump on a bike if you don't feel comfortable on a scooter. And now, so for the scooters, we've doubled the number throughout the city, and then the bikes are also available throughout the city.
Is there maybe a source or a place where you can kind of get the details on that? I imagine it requires sometimes some credit card available to kind of charge an account. And
Yes.
That sort of thing?
So you have to, when you go up to a scooter or a bike, there's an app that you download. So you download an app, you can put in all of your information, you can put in your credit card, kind of like, it's very similar to Uber or Lyft. So you put all that information in, and then a map will come up and it'll show you where the scooters or the bikes are in close proximity to you so that you know where they are. And then you scan it and you can start it, and then when you return it, you take a picture, scan it, submit it, and show that you're done. Yeah.
Simple enough.
It's actually unbelievably easy to use. In fact, this weekend, I had a really busy weekend this past weekend with the Neighborhood Summit and Festival of the Arts, and so I was out in the neighborhoods and downtown quite a bit, and there were scooters everywhere. I mean, everywhere. It was very cool to see.
Have you got an opportunity to try out a scooter or an e-bike yet?
I have. I haven't done an e-bike, but I've been on the scooters. Yes. With my helmet.
With your helmet, okay.
I don't see a lot of people. I don't see a lot of people with a helmet, but we do recommend a helmet.
Okay.
Yes. And they go 11 miles an hour roughly, and so they're not super fast, but they'll get you somewhere a whole lot quicker than walking.
Sometimes there's maybe some of the complaints that you were talking about is a little bit about the etiquette with that and whether they're on sidewalks or not and where they're left. And just wondered a little bit about how that gets addressed, or what are the appropriate ways to do this?
Yeah, so we do ask people to return them into the appropriate places, and on the sidewalk we have the squares kind of blocked off with paint so you know where they go. Obviously not everyone leaves them in those spaces. That's probably the number one complaint I've received. Is that they're left somewhere, or they create a hazard in the right of way, or people, will throw them, down the bank, or they'll throw them in a tree, and so we do. So the companies that run them, they do go around at night, and they pick them up and they charge them and they put them back. So typically, if they're not in the appropriate place, it's taken care of within 24 hours.
GPS or something that tells them where it is?
They all have GPS.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. You had mentioned being at a number of activities this past weekend, and it is the season for festivals and events. So first, talk a little bit about Neighborhood Summit, how that went, since we kind of featured that last month.
Yeah, so the summit was different this year. It kicked off on Tuesday around noon at Studio Park, and was then broken up over 5 days. So Tuesday was kind of the kickoff. We had a speaker, gave some of our sponsors an opportunity to speak, and then each night, so Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, there was a different summit in a park in one of the wards. And it was actually really fun. It felt like a park party, like you went, and they had food trucks, and they had a lot of tables set up with free information, and a lot of community groups were there handing out information, and then they had a speaker and a panel discussion, and then they wrapped up the night. And then Saturday, they had a big marketplace down at Studio Park, so we came together a little bit after noon on Saturday, and several of us spoke. There was a keynote speaker. We announced the Neighborhood Match Fund awardees, and so we honored them on Saturday. And then there was a marketplace. We closed down the street, and there was a marketplace where people could go and support local businesses.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the summit is pretty heavy in content, some good content. Were there, would you say, takeaways, directives, next steps that came out of this year's version?
Yeah, I would say what was interesting, and the speaker Tempest spoke about this on Saturday, was that there were different conversations in each ward. So some of the first ward a lot of conversations were heavily focused around housing, affordable housing, people experiencing homelessness. In third ward, a lot of the conversation was about violence prevention. In the second ward, it was a mix of conversations. So I think that was an interesting takeaway, is that there are a lot of critical issues in the city, but there are still some neighborhood-specific issues that people are concerned about. So how do you really drill down and make sure that you're providing opportunity for people to be engaged, but then also how do you address those unique issues that different neighborhoods are experiencing while still having a citywide effort around strengthening neighborhoods. So it was good. It was a good conversation.
Do you feel that each area that had their each ward kind of had some different focus areas? Do you feel like the city is aligned with those needs, that it's kind of at the forefront too, that the city's kind of in step with what the neighborhood sees?
Yeah, I do. I think there was a lot of alignment. I wouldn't say that any of the concerns raised were concerns that we haven't been working on or that we know about, or we know that they're complex issues that need to be solved. If anything, I think there was a good conversation around, okay, but how do we keep engagement and involvement as we continue this work, and how do we better communicate? How do we stay engaged? I think the Neighborhood Match Fund is a great example of how we work really closely with community to elevate and support grassroots initiatives to address some of the complex issues experienced in neighborhoods. And then I talked to quite a few people about the participatory budgeting process that we're getting ready to embark on. It's a new process. We haven't done it before, but we're really hopeful to have a lot of the people who were engaged in the summit actively engaged in that process.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with the Neighborhood Match Fund, new recipients announced. Can you highlight one or two maybe?
Yeah, so there were several announced. One of them that is being funded is to support a network of counselors, mental health counselors in the African American community. And how do you create a stronger network so that people who are struggling, they can go to and reach out to a counselor that they can relate to, that looks like them. And so I thought that was a great project. There's a number of them that were funded, and we just posted them on Saturday. So.
Okay. That is that quarterly?
Yeah, typically, I actually believe we accept quarterly, but we lengthen the amount of time that you can fulfill and implement your project.
Okay, so the next opportunity, when's the deadline for that?
Ooh, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll get back to you. But it is in cycles.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the way it works then is that it's an equal match. A community group or organization can kind of determine a plan for their area of the city, their neighborhood, and the city will match, if they're an awardee, equal amount of funding then.
Yeah, and the match doesn't have to be in dollars. So you can use volunteer hours, you can use in-kind donations, you can use expertise and say this is how much we're giving of our time and our talent, and then that can be matched with dollars. So it could be dollars, it could be a dollar match, but it could be matched in other ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to stop for our first break, and we'll be back with Kristin Turkelson. She's Planning Director for the City of Grand Rapids. The two of you will have a conversation, so we'll be right back after this.
For over 30 years after humble beginnings as a public access TV station, the Community Media Center has grown to be an active, multi-platform media and technology assistance organization, encouraging and enabling our community to push their creative boundaries. We power a variety of resources, including a music-centered community radio station, WYCE, a community venue with stage and screen at Wealthy Theater, citizen-driven journalism with The Rapidian, a web development team empowering local nonprofits, an education department that trains and broadens students' minds, and a free speech public access television studio, GRTV, where it all began. By introducing audiences to new voices and ideas, we enhance community engagement and create connections between artists and audiences, enriching our city's cultural offerings. We empower and collaborate with platforms and resources accessible to all and used by all. Every free democratic society depends on media, accessible to the community and uncensored by government. The Community Media Center continues this work for the media landscape of today and tomorrow. These platforms and services empower our neighbors to tell their stories and explore the richness of culture that Grand Rapids has to offer. Connect, discover, learn, create, and share. The Grand Rapids Community Media Center.
All right, welcome back. Delighted to have Kristin Turkelson, our director of our planning department, with us today to talk about planning. And it's one of those departments in the city that I think people don't really know much about unless they have to interact with it.
Yep.
But you do a lot of work throughout our city. You are the liaison and oversee our Board of Zoning Appeals and our Planning Commission. Both of those groups meet every single month, sometimes multiple times a month. And you work with those two bodies. And then you have your own department. You work a lot with people who want to do a development or build in the city. And you're getting ready to embark on a master plan.
We have a lot going on.
A lot going on. So I'm glad you're able to be here because I do feel like you do a lot of work behind the scenes. And this can let people know about that work. So maybe to start off, you've been with the city for a number of years, but you have been you've been director of play. Is it 2 years now?
No, just over, I was on acting assignment for the first little while. So
Okay.
it's been a permanent position for just over a year now.
Okay. So for folks who don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and even like what led you to want to do urban planning?
Well, that's a funny story, actually. So I'm actually originally from Toronto, Canada, and my brother went to school for planning, and not the most studious. So I used to help him with his work, and he was studying urban planning, and I thought, well, this is really interesting. And I was always really interested in cities. You know, growing up in Toronto, we'd go downtown, and it's just how it functions and interacted and why people want to be there. And so I kind of knew early on what I wanted to do. So I did go to Eastern Michigan University, and I also swam competitively, which is what brought me to the U.S. initially. So I started my career, and I ended up over in Grand Haven for a few years and served as their planning director. It was 6 years, so a little more than a few. And then I started with the city of Grand Rapids in 2013. So the big city called, and I answered. You know, I'm always fascinated how cities, you know, how alive they become, and all the people that make up the heart of the city, and that just really interests me.
Yeah, it's great work.
Yes.
So for folks who are, that is interesting. I didn't know that, that you got interested because of your brother.
I know.
Yeah.
It's such a silly story, but.
No, I love it. I love it. So for people who aren't familiar with planning department and what you do, I want you to talk a little bit about the scope of services in the planning department and you know, where people go for help if they do need help.
Yep, you're right. It has a huge scope. You know, everything from if you want to build a deck on your home to building a home. We also do signs for businesses that want to advertise and showcase where they're at. And then we do the big developments that people are more familiar with. You know, the Bridge Street Market, for example, just down the street from here. All the affordable housing or housing projects generally, all of that. So if there's any physical construction or change to a property in the city of Grand Rapids, it does come through the planning department. Of course, we work closely with the building department as well, that people might be a little more familiar with when they have to pull a building permit. But we also have a long-range planning division. So not only are we doing kind of that transactional based, what we call zoning administration, where we review, does the single-family home have the characters in the right place on the property? How tall are the buildings? What uses are able to go in a commercial district? So we do all that, but we also do the long-range planning, which is that visionary work. So where should our commercial districts be? You know, what sort of density do we want to see in our residential neighborhoods? So yeah, it is quite a broad scope. A lot of work, but I mean, I love it, and I think we have a really good team that is really invested in the quality of work and how the city grows and develops.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about zoning. You also work on updates to the zoning code.
We do.
And so typically, you are before us at the City Commission saying this is a recommendation for changes. And over the last several years, we've made quite a few changes trying to encourage and incent more housing.
Yes.
So a lot of that work and background work and research comes out of your office. And when you come before us, you're like, this is what's happening in other cities, and this is the language, and this is what we recommend for the zoning code changes.
Yep. Yeah, we really look at zoning code as like a living document, right? So it's the technical or the laws of how we grow and develop, but we know that technology changes, needs change. When you speak of the housing work, we have to be adaptable to say these are the needs that are currently being faced with, and so a lot of it is just things that, based on our experience as the planners that work with both property owners and building owners and developers to show what's working and what's not. So most recently, we recommended a change to the housing policies relative to ground floor residential in our traditional business areas, and so we saw a lot of, I think, strong need that we brought forward to the City Commission for consideration, and that, you know, we don't take those recommendations lightly. We do a lot of research, and we try to have the data behind the recommendations to kind of support why these changes are important.
Yeah. Over the past couple of years, we've had quite a few big issues to tackle, and as you said, your department and you, even personally and professionally, you are always reacting to what is coming before you, but you're also being very proactive in planning. So over the last several years, you led the work we've done around becoming an age-friendly city. So Ginny, out of your office, under your leadership, has taken the lead on that work. And then we spent a lot of time the last couple of years on our code around marijuana. And both medical marijuana at first and now retail. And your department played a huge role in that.
Yes, that was a lot of work. You know, in some ways we started out being reactionary because the rules at the state level changed, and we had to come out of the gate pretty fast with our recommendations to commission. And that's always hard work because, you know, you always want more time, right? We want to be thoughtful in our approach, and we want to understand, especially when we have a new industry like the cannabis industry. We knew that the social equity policy was going to be critical. So, you know, that too was kind of new territory. There wasn't a lot of precedent or experience, even at a national level, for us to look to. So, you know, sometimes we always want more time to research, but at the same time, I think it's really helpful that we have a history of maybe being a little bit more conservative in our recommendations. In our department, we always say, like, you can't put the cat back in the bag, right? And so we're conservative in our recommendations to the commission and to the community out of respect to say, okay, we think that this is the right path, and then in a year or 2 years, whatever the right time frame is, maybe we need to relook at that, and we're willing to. But land use law is always a tricky thing, so we want to make sure that we're thoughtful or methodical in our approach and recognize that we have the ability to maybe loosen the restrictions would be the easiest way to put it, versus maybe starting out with restrictions that are very permissive and then going, that might not have been in the best interest of our community. How do we scale it back? And then that's a far more difficult path. So
yeah, that is difficult. And hopefully in the next few years, some of our neighboring cities will allow it, so that we're not one of the few cities in the county.
Yeah.
And that way it'll be more, I would say, less concentrated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's,
So we'll see.
Regional planning is a very healthy thing for us to look at.
Yeah, yeah. So a big project that you'll be undertaking soon is the update of the master plan. So
Yes.
our overall master plan was last updated almost 20 years
years
ago.
ago.
And a lot of people who maybe aren't familiar with the update of the master plan, this will be a whole new process. I know there are some people who were around 20 years ago when we updated it last time,
Yeah.
and they'll likely be engaged as well, but there's going to be a lot of people that haven't been through a master plan. And so we're working on a framework on what that looks like. Do you want to talk a little bit about why do we update a master plan, what's going to be different, and then what's a plan for it?
Yep. So master plans, I think, are super fun, right? Like we don't have that much, we don't often get to do this work because it's a 20-year scope. And so back in 2002, we set a great foundation. We hadn't done a master plan, community master plan, in I think it was 40 years. It was a while.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of critical need that had to happen. So we have a really good foundation that we're able to build upon with the 2021. Well, now it's 2021 master plan. And so it's a really exciting opportunity. But we know that the needs have changed, and we know that the issues have changed. So we had a really good foundation, but we need to start talking about different things that we know are important to our community, like social. Environmental justice, climate resiliency or climate change, equity. We weren't having those conversations in the same way back in 2001.
Yeah.
So we know that in 2021 that those are key issues that we need to look at.
Yeah, and housing.
Housing, yes.
So housing is going to be a big issue. So for people who aren't familiar with what updating a master plan entails, talk a little bit about what you are hoping will happen over the next 18 months.
Yeah. So master plan is the vision, for those that don't know, is the entire vision for how we want to grow and develop. So where do we want to go from here? What does the city of Grand Rapids look like in the next 20 years? So what community will my child live in? And so part of that process is talking with people, is listening and making sure that we're approaching the community and understanding what do we need. So we need some very intentional engagement strategies.
Yeah.
We need to meet people where they're at. Not everybody wants to come to the development center or to City Hall to participate in these processes. And so we need to meet people where they're at and really listen. And then that really serves as the framework or the basis for what our recommendations end up being. So I think over the next 18 months, there will be quite a robust community engagement effort. COVID might, play a role in how we engage, and certainly being more intentional, I think, with our efforts is going to be critical. So we're really excited. So hopefully in 18 to 24 months, we'll have a new plan that will, serve the entire community and create a community that's very accessible.
Yeah. So structure and process-wise, we'll move forward with appointing a steering committee. And then we'll identify a consultant to work with,
Yes.
who will work with us through the process. And then we will lay out kind of the different opportunities for people to get engaged and what that looks like. And I know last time we had thousands and thousands of people who were involved in updating our master plan.
Yes.
And I hope it is not just that many, I hope it's tripled.
Yes.
So we'll see what we can do by using different platforms. And then the process, it goes through the Planning Commission, and then it'll come to the City Commission for approval. And then that really, as you said, is a blueprint for future land use development in our city. And then the planning, how it's used is when a project comes before the Planning Commission will make a determination whether that's consistent with the master plan.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So we look at the master plan's the vision document, and then the zoning ordinance is the tool that we use, the hammer and the nail that we use to implement it. So yeah, the Planning Commission is responsible as a city staff to look at both documents to make sure that any new project that comes online really serves the needs of the community and meets the vision for what that neighborhood expected and needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we only have a couple seconds left, so I think that's a good spot to start or to stop. And maybe in this next segment, you can talk a little bit about other plans that have already been done, like Grand Rapids or area-specific plans, and how that's incorporated into the master planning process. Because I know a lot of people feel very strongly about those plans that they invested a lot of time and money into.
I can speak to that.
And we can talk a little bit about that.
Great.
All right. So with that, we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back together with Linda.
88.1 FM WYCE, a proud member of the Grand Rapids Community Media Center, has been serving the Grand Rapids community and beyond for over 30 years, offering a world of music through commercial-free, independent radio. Head on over to wyce.org today, where you can stream our broadcast 24/7, check out exclusive artist interviews, or make a donation. From everyone at 88.1 FM WYCE, thank you for your support.
Welcome back to City Connection, and we're going to continue our conversation between Mayor Bliss and Kristin Turkelson with the Planning Department. And you were in the midst of a question, just about to launch into a little bit more information. So let's just continue.
All right. So yes, I was just, so one thing I've heard, lots of people talk to me about the master plan. We've been talking about it for a couple of years now. As we've made changes to zoning code. So one thing that I've consistently heard from folks, especially individuals who live in neighborhoods who have an area-specific plan, which is a kind of smaller neighborhood-specific master plan.
Yep.
That's always the best way I can explain it. What happens to those area-specific plans in this process of updating the master plan? And one woman actually said, "Do you just throw all those out?" And I'm like, no. We don't throw them out. So why don't you speak to that?
Sure. You're right. So the master plan is kind of that macro level, and the area-specific plan is the micro level, the neighborhood-focused work. So when we did the pre-scoping phase, or the phase one, if you will, we hired 20 neighborhood facilitators. And so part of their work, when they were having those community conversations about our master plan, what's working and what doesn't with their community, part of that is if there was an area-specific plan, how about talk about that too? Like, you know, is it still a valid plan? I don't have a full answer for you yet, except the intent is if the plan still works and still means something to the group that made it or the area that made it, then absolutely we would just carry it forward. And maybe it needs some updating, and that's understandable. So I think, there's a lot of really good work that is incredibly useful. And in planning world, a plan that's 15 years old can still be valid. It takes a while for these visions to be implemented, right? So I do expect that vast majority of the area-specific plans, what we'll find is that the community or the area, the group that created them will want to see those carried forward. And so I expect that to happen with some input. You know, if things need to be updated a little bit, let's do it now.
Are we going to continue the working with the neighborhood connectors throughout the whole process? Or was that just for phase one?
That was just for phase one, but there was a lot of good work, and I think that structure really serves the community well, or seems to serve the community well. So I think in some ways we would likely replicate that, and we've done that. You know, I think GR Forward, we did something very similar, is to really look at our community. They are the experts, right? And so, and then also paying them for the work that they do to lead and be the expert in their neighborhood, I think is important. So I think we'll continue that structure, whether it's the same individuals. You know, some didn't sign up for a 36-month process, but if they're interested, yes, I think that there's definitely a role for them to play.
Good. You know, the other thing I was thinking about, as I've talked about the update on the master plan, is that, you know, our plan needs to plan for growth, right? That we know we need more housing. We know that we want to attract people to live here, and we want them to be able to find a place to work and to live. And so, you know, how do we plan for growth? And one of the things that we did over the last year and a half is that we worked to do this housing needs analysis and assessment, and it's a very robust, comprehensive plan. I think it's over 300 pages. Yeah. Very, very informative. So as we think about updating the master plan and thinking about how do we plan for growth, will that document be used kind of as a foundational or informative? I'm sure there's probably lots of documents and studies that you'll be pulling on as you kind of train the steering committee to get ready to take this task on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that document particularly will be incredibly useful for us, because it'll really be an education tool. A lot of times, you know, housing and housing policy is a really personal conversation, because it's where people live, right? And so people are emotionally invested in really wanting to understand, why is their neighborhood changing? Why are we adding more housing? And change can be hard. And so when we have the data behind these recommendations, like the housing needs analysis provides us with, it really helps support where housing is needed, what kind of housing, and at what price points. Now, that's not necessarily a zoning conversation, but I think it really helps inform housing policy generally for the city. So yes, absolutely, we look at that, and Ryan Kilpatrick, the housing practice leader that was the project manager for that, he's a planner by trade as well, and so he and I have had a lot of good conversation about ways that we think that could help and inform and educate.
You had mentioned that the zoning and regulation, that those are that's a living document, and that it kind of evolves and changes as need. Do you see a 20-year master plan in a similar way?
Oh, I don't, but I don't know that it's not. You know, it sets forward the vision for the next 20 years, so it's a lot broader in scope, right, to meet the entire need and how we envision our community. Where are the pressure points, and where do we want to grow physically? And so it's not as nimble, and it's not intended to be. Going through a master planning process has very specific technical requirements that are set out by state law, and so that we don't see, you know, I think in some ways for political reasons too, like we don't see new commissioners come on board and have different agendas about what they want to see, that it's a very intentional process that allows us to move methodically and carefully so that we're making sure that the plan represents the community. So I don't find it to be as nimble as like a zoning ordinance, for example. So I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but I don't see it quite the same.
Okay, yeah, absolutely makes sense. When you look at the previous one, or the one that's in place right now, what do you see as themes, and what do you see that has totally switched, totally changed our direction and where you see the future going?
Yeah. So thus far, you know, through the pre-scoping phase with the hiring of the neighborhood facilitators that I mentioned, I don't know that we've seen anything stop being relevant. I think we had so much good work back in 2001, or just prior to 2001 master plan, and we had a really robust engagement process. And so we based our recommendations on SMART growth principles, which in planning world are pretty timeless. They serve the interest of the community, and they've served them well. And so a lot of the themes that we had about, you know, great neighborhoods and vital business districts and partnerships, all of that is still really important and relevant today. And as a planner, you know, we thought that, but that phase one, or the neighborhood facilitator work, really validated that work, that those are conversations that have evolved but still need to happen and are still important. But we know that there's new themes that have emerged. And I mentioned, you know, climate resiliency and environmental justice, equity, safe neighborhoods. And so what role does the built environment play into those themes or those concepts, so that we know that they've expanded and evolved, but I don't know that we've, any of the themes we've talked about in 2001, they haven't gone away. They've just changed.
You know, covering a few decades, there's talk, right now we're kind of planning for growth, but we've gone through the last couple decades with some periods of just the opposite, a little bit of setbacks here and there. And when you look at a future, how do you kind of embed the ability for, I think you used the term agility or nimbleness, to kind of weather all kinds of situations looking ahead?
Yeah. So, gosh, it was several years ago. I remember listening to a speaker, I believe it was out of Charleston at a national planning conference, and you know, planning is just that, you stay the course. And so it's really important that if we have this vision, we support it and we don't lose sight of what our vision is. So even though we may have had a really difficult year and lumber prices may delay construction projects, that we don't lose sight of the vision, and sometimes we just see a slowdown. But we don't change what that vision is to accommodate what's happening in the current climate or the current market. We keep that vision because we know that long term, if we can realize that vision, we're in a far better position. And I think we saw that back in, you know, the 2008, 2009. We absolutely saw things in the market and the economy change, but our vision remained constant. And post, you know, the recession, we've had $5 billion in investment, construction value that have been invested in our community. And so that same plan from 2001, we had a recession, and yet all the good work that happened afterwards, because we didn't lose sight of what we wanted to see.
Planning during a pandemic must color things just a little bit, but you're still looking very far ahead.
Yeah.
How does that color things a bit? Just an awareness of what can happen, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, it was, you know, it was a really fun experiment in some ways, from a planning perspective, I should say. you know, we really worked hard as a city to say, what can we do to meet businesses where they're at? What policies can we put in place? You know, I mentioned that, you know, zoning isn't always the most nimble, that we've got processes and these legal structures, but we were able to work through with City Commission and develop a policy. We call it the temporary event policy. So if businesses needed to expand, we were able to provide the path forward for that, to help businesses survive and recover. And so it's been, I mentioned, a little bit of an experiment, because all of these codes and processes we had in place before, it's like, well, suddenly we were able to allow it as temporary, and things have worked out pretty well in some cases. So it'll be interesting to see how we've learned, or what we've learned, and how we incorporate it moving forward.
On that similar thought, was there anything about this time of pandemic, this last year and 3+ months, that jumped us forward in a way? I mean, there was some loosening of some regulations in ways, some opportunities that wouldn't have maybe happened under status quo.
Yep. Oh gosh, yeah. I think the community and the business community is far more resilient, you know, and creative. Oh my goodness, the things that they asked and wanted to see, and you know, our goal was to get to yes. How do we support it? But making sure we accommodate for any impacts that could be to the neighbors, for example, that would live right next door. So, yeah, I think that the resiliency and the creativity was really fascinating, and also I think that the business community was incredibly appreciative of us listening and saying, okay, maybe what tool do we have? What can we do? How can we help? That we didn't just throw process up.
Yeah, you know, one observation of mine, I feel like for years we have talked about how do we become a 4-season city, right? You go to Canada, and you go to the UP, you go to Buffalo, you go to Minnesota. In the winter, a lot of people are still outside, and there's a lot of outside events, and people bundle up, and they spend a lot of time outside, even in the winter. And we have, especially with the DDA, they've tried to do the World of Winter every year, and it's picked up quite a bit of steam. But then this past winter, with the pandemic, so many businesses were like, I think I'm gonna do igloos again next year, and I'm gonna do, and on the city side, I would say not just the planning department was great, but also our fire department, and giving approval for the heaters that were used. And I think it was almost harder for them to get to yes at times. We had to nudge them a little bit and say, look, cities all over this country are doing this. But I think that was something that was striking to me, is that the pandemic led to this vision that a lot of people have been talking about for a long time, that I think people were not sure if it would work, right? So anyway, it's been interesting.
So that makes me think of, as you do the next planning for the next 20 years, it kind of sets or helps develop a personality for Grand Rapids. And what do you see as maybe a change in the personality? Maybe it could be as small as a 4-season community, but what kind of personality we want Grand Rapids to have for the next 20 years?
Oh goodness, I think of the word inclusive, that we want to be a community that's accessible and welcoming. And so how do we do that? And you know, I play a very small role in that when I think of that, but you know, creating a built environment and activity and vibrancy helps, helps create that welcoming.
Yeah, I agree.
There's lots of kinds of plans out there, and this being the master plan, and we talked a little bit about how the neighborhood plans really have to fit within, and just that it doesn't shut one aside. There just are micro and macro differences. City manager issued a 3-year plan recently, and I'm just wondering, you know, as you kind of layer all these things, is it difficult to keep in mind all the different types of plans that have been set, or do they all seem to be pretty seamless?
Well, I think we work together as a team at City Hall, and so I've got really amazing colleagues that help partner and come together and say, don't lose sight of this, or don't forget my plan over here. And so a lot of the department directors will participate on the master plan and serve as kind of the subject matter experts and bring forward the plans that they have, and making sure that we're thinking about those. The strategic plan that you mentioned, you know, there's a lot of recommendations within that, or requirements, I should say, within that's making sure, like as part of the master planning process, we're tracking who's participating. Is it inclusive? Are we really getting the input from our entire community, or is it a subset? Well, we won't know that if we don't track or understand who's participating in these processes. So yep, they all work together.
Okay, and with just a few seconds left, what are some next opportunities for community members to participate or at least observe?
We're still working on that. Mayor Bliss mentioned the steering committee will help scope the project. So I think probably in late summer, early fall is when we will really start that public-facing engagement process where the community will hear more and be invited to participate.
Okay. Kristin Turkelson, City Director for the city's planning department. Thanks for being with us today, talking a little bit about the master plan and the process that you're in right now. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks for your work.
Thanks.
We'll take another break here on City Connection. Be back in a few minutes.
How do you build a strong local food economy? Meet Chris. Chris is opening Osteria Rosa, a locally sourced Italian restaurant in a building brought back to life by 616 Development. But he doesn't know any local farmers to supply him with food year-round. This is Melissa. Melissa runs the Fulton Street Farmers Market and publishes a long list, even in the dead of winter, of available produce, meats, bakery goods, and more on the Rapidian. This is Amy. Amy wants to do more to support the farmers in her local food economy. Amy talks to Melissa, who introduces her to farmers at the Fulton Street Farmers Market, and Amy, in turn, publishes their stories, also on the Rapidian. Chris hears about the Rapidian and now has access to a local grocery list and information that he needs to make connections with local farmers. He feeds his patrons with local food year-round. Connections multiply, meals are shared, a stronger local food economy is built.
Welcome back to City Connection, and our thanks to Kristin Turkelson, Planning Director for the City of Grand Rapids. We learned a lot on that. We're going to talk a little bit more, Mayor, and I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the American Rescue Plan funds that the city's received, somewhere around $2 million, and that there's a community opportunity to weigh in on how those are used.
Yeah, so I'm glad we have an opportunity to talk about this because I think it's a little confusing. It's something we haven't done before. So I'll do big picture and then talk about the $2 million that we set aside for a participatory budgeting process. So through the American Rescue Plan, the City of Grand Rapids, we were allocated about $92 million, and it comes in two different tranches, as we call it. So this year, it's 50% this year, 50% next year, and it can be used through the end of the year of 2024. And it's meant, the intent was to help cities, especially cities like ours that had some significant budget shortfalls, to help fill those holes, but also to respond to some of the needs that came from the pandemic. So we got $46 million in our budget last year. So we were ending our budget last year, and we were pulling money to pay our bills from our budget stabilization plan or fund. And then going into this year, we were projecting another $10-15 million deficit. So in the budget process, we took about $30 million from the ARPA funds, from the federal funds, and we used them to fill budget holes, to get our budget stabilization back to where it was and to pass a balanced, largely continuation budget, where we didn't make any significant increases. So we buttoned up our budget process and passed our $536 million budget using about $30 million from ARPA for that budget. Well, then we took $10 million, and over the next 3 months, we're going to be making decisions about how to spend about $10 million from the recovery plan. My hope is that we move forward with taking $5 million of that and putting it into the Affordable Housing Fund. So that'll be a non-endowed fund through the Community Foundation that will have a board, and we'll hopefully use those dollars to help with addressing our current needs around affordable housing. We'll take a portion of those funds, probably about $1 million, and put it towards violence prevention efforts, knowing that that's a huge need in the community. And then we're taking $2 million for this participatory budgeting process. So what we've decided to do, and that process that we are going to use is one that is recommended from the National Participatory Budgeting, not lots, some other cities that do participatory budgeting, they follow these kind of tenets of how do you do a thoughtful process. We are going to take $1 million that will go to 3rd Ward, about $600,000 that will go to 1st Ward, and about $400,000 to the 2nd Ward. We'll identify a steering committee, so there will be 3 individuals from each ward who serve on a steering committee, and then they will work either with city staff, or if they want to utilize an outside community partner, they'll go through a community engagement process. They'll identify their priorities for the ward or their neighborhood. Once those priorities are identified, we'll vet them out and we'll make sure that they're eligible under federal guidelines to use these funds. And then we'll go through a prioritization process with community to elevate which ones get the most votes and that people are most supportive of, and then we'll fund those projects. And so we're hoping to do a pretty quick turnaround, probably a 3 to 5 month process total, but we want to have those dollars expended and utilized in our neighborhoods yet this year.
The division among the wards isn't equal, so tell a little bit about how that was decided.
Yeah. So we looked at a couple different data points. So we looked at CDBG formulas, so Community Development Block Grant, the federal government, they do a formula breakdown where they look at poverty level and needs. And so under our Community Development Block Grant, we can only spend those dollars in what's called target areas. And so we looked at those federal guidelines and how many of those census tracts were in each ward. And then we looked at our neighborhoods of focus. And, we had a conversation around this knowledge that for, decades before any of us were sitting around the commission table, there wasn't intentional investment in the 3rd ward. And so as a body, we decided to do what we can to make that very clear, that we recognize that there are greater needs in the 3rd ward and that there has been disinvestment in the past. And so there was quite a bit of discussion among the commissioners. Some wanted more money for their ward. Some wanted it to be a little bit, there to be maybe a little more consistency in the amounts. But ultimately, as a full body, we supported the $1,600,000 and $400,000. Okay. Yeah, and we'll be launching that process literally in the next 14 days. And we are, it'll be, I'm excited about the process. I know quite a few people have questions about it, and I keep telling them this is the first time and we're going to learn together, but we're going to do our best to make sure that the ideas, whether it's a project or a program or an effort that the neighbors come up with, that we're going to make sure that we do a lot of good community engagement to get input, and then we're going to make a decision and move forward. And then hopefully next year, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Hopefully we'll learn from this process, and next year we'll have funds allocated again where we can do this again.
Very interesting. With just a couple more minutes, I think I would love to stay on this ARPA discussion. And first off, I find it very interesting that the Commission did come together to try to right some imbalances of historic measure. And I wanted to just ask, you said there is room for community input, but were there any guidelines given in terms of we want to address housing, we want to address this, or is it very much sitting among this committee in this ward to determine what's the priority? It's
a blank slate. Okay. A couple commissioners have already started talking to residents, and we know that some residents in some wards, they really want 1 or 2 big projects that they want to do. Other ideas are have a fund where you can help people with home ownership. So I think we're going to see a wide range of ideas. A couple parameters that we have put in place is that it can only be one-time investment. So we won't fund any recommendations that require ongoing operational support. So we know that these are one-time funds. We're not sure what the next year holds. So that is going to be very clear. It can be capital projects, it can be programs, it can be facade. A couple businesses reached out to me, and they're very supportive of facade improvement grants. So I think what we're going to find from the different wards, we're going to have very different ideas based on what the needs are in those different neighborhoods. Yeah. It'll be really interesting, and I'm delighted that we're able to work with residents to identify the needs and invest $2 million in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, this is something that really interesting to follow as
Yeah.
things develop. And you said you feel like within a few weeks that these funds will be distributed. That's the hope.
Well, within a few weeks, we'll have the steering committee and the process
Gotcha.
up, but we're hoping to have the final recommendations by ideally September. We want to get the funds out the door yet this year.
Okay.
So.
The steering committees, are those chosen by commissioners? How is that
Yeah.
process done?
So each commissioner identifies one person per their ward. So two commissioner appointed members, and then I have one per ward for a total of 9. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to close things out for this episode of City Connection. Anything else you want to? We've got a busy summer. Anything you want to
We
invite folks
do.
to take part in?
I just today presented a proclamation for Juneteenth. So there's going to be some great celebrations throughout our city. One of them is a new one's going to be at Anabwin Park, but then also at Dickinson Park. So those will be a opportunity for the community to come together. But there's a whole. You should see our events page. It is filling up quickly. So there's going to be a lot to do. Many of the events are free throughout the community, so I encourage people to get outside. We know it's safer outside. Get outside, reconnect with people, and enjoy summer in Michigan.
A very different summer this year,
Yes.
and back and alive. Well, Mayor Bliss, thanks for spending another hour with us on City Connection, and we'll be back next month. I'm Linda Gellasch, closing out for the June episode of City Connection here on GRTV Livewire Channel 24.